Hi, today I'm going to show you how you can add keyboard input to a React app using hooks. We're going to be using this little example app that I created here with some buttons, and we only want to show these two dangerous buttons at the bottom when we're holding down a key combination. Otherwise, we want to show a message that's like, hold down these keys to access the dangerous options or something. To do that, we're going to create a new hook called maybe use key, and that's going to take in a key. And what we want to do is we want to make that hook hold some state, and that hook is going to hold state about whether or not that specific key is pressed. So we'll say const pressed set pressed, and that's going to be equal to use state, which will auto import from React. If it doesn't auto import for you, make sure that you manually import useState from React. So we're going to return pressed, and that is basically all of the state management for useKey that we need to do. What we need to do now is create a function called match that is going to take a keyboard event and tell us whether or not that event is relevant to the key that this useKey hook is kind of like listening for. To do that, we'll say does key equal event.key, and .key is a property of all keyboard events that basically tells you the name of the key. What we also need to do though is say to lowercase, because sometimes key event names can be uppercase, sometimes they can be lowercase, depending on whether or not they're like control keys, like shift or control alt function, those kind of things, and also whether or not the shift key is pressed. Like if you press shift then A, that will be a capital A, but an A without pressing shift will be a lowercase. We want to handle that kind of stuff manually, so we're just converting everything to lowercase to make our lives easier. The next thing we need is a function, we'll call it onDown, which will be an event listener that takes an event, not an event listener, an event handler rather, that takes an event and then basically says if that event matches the key that we're listening for, then what we want to do is set pressed to true. And we'll do the same thing for onUp, and we'll set press to false if the event matches the key we're listening for. Then what we need to do is actually bind the events, which we need to do inside of useEffect, which happens on renders, or after renders rather, and we want this effect to update whenever we change key. Next, what we need to do is actually bind the onUp and onDown functions. So we'll add an event listener to the window for keyDown, and we'll bind that to onDown. Then we'll bind another event, this time the opposite, for when we release a key, and we'll bind that to onUp. Now, it's a rule that when you use useEffect, you have to return a function that undoes whatever that effect actually does. So here we bound two events. In the return function, what we need to do is remove two events. And that's just kind of React convention, so that whenever something goes out of like rendering scope, everything that's set up gets torn down, and you're not left with any like memory leaks or events that are hanging around that aren't relevant anymore. So that should pretty much be the entirety of our use key hook. Now down here we want, say, just to test use key, maybe we want to only show our danger buttons over here, not use key, shift. Maybe we only want to show the danger buttons while we're holding shift, right? So to do that, we'll create a new instance of that hook, and then we'll come down here and we'll say shift and a fragment. If you haven't seen fragments before, they're essentially a way to group elements in JSX without actually explicitly putting them inside of a div or a span or another type of like actual DOM element to contain it. They can just kind of like be together in a group, and when this is rendered, they will be chucked out here with the rest of them. They won't actually be in another container, but you can only have one thing, so we need to kind of put them in something to be able to actually use it. So now if I save this, we should only see those action buttons while I press shift, which is exactly what we want. And we could say, do the opposite here. We could say not shift and a paragraph that said, not package, go away Visual Studio Code, a paragraph that says hold shift to see dangerous actions. And now when we're not holding shift, we see that, and when we hold shift, we see the dangerous actions. Maybe we want to use a keyboard shortcut though. We want use key shift and use key. Maybe we only want to show these actions when we're holding shift D, maybe for dangerous or something. If we try and run this though, we'll see an error that says use key is called conditionally. And this might not look like it's conditional because there's no if statements or loops or something, but there actually is an if statement here. JavaScript has a behavior called short circuit evaluation, is what it's generally known as, that says if you have two values, say A and B, and you try and do an AND between them, what it's going to do is it's going to evaluate A first, and if that's false, then it knows there's no need to evaluate B, because AND can't possibly be true if one of them is false. But in that case, use key D never gets ran, so the hooks get ran in a different order each time, and that kind of breaks the first rule of hooks, which is that hooks need to be ran in the exact same order every single time. So to fix that, we can just create a function out here called AND that takes two parameters A and B and returns A and B, because short circuit evaluation doesn't apply to function calls. So we can just kind of wrap these two inside of AND, and now when we run it, it's now shift plus D. So if we hold shift, nothing happens. We hold D, nothing happens. But if we hold shift and D, we get to see these dangerous actions. So that's how you can use React hooks to add keyboard input to your React application.